You've just woken up. The year is 1870, the height of westward expansion in America. You are a settler, perhaps a farmer from the crowded east, worn down by exhausted soil, or an immigrant from a densely populated European village yearning for space. Life back home was hard, often brutal, dictated by landlords, factory owners, or the rigid social hierarchies of the old world. But it is familiar, predictable. You have your family, your community, your crowded streets, the constant hum of human activity. Then, a whisper began to spread, carried on the winds of opportunity, the promise of free land in the West. The Homestead Act of 1862 offered 160 acres to anyone willing to settle and improve it for 5 years. This was the lure of the empty land, a siren song promising ultimate independence, self-sufficiency, and a chance to build a new life free from the constraints of the past. At first, you might have dismissed it. A tall tale, perhaps. A trick. You cling to the familiarity of your life, however difficult. Your small plot of exhausted soil, the crowded tenement, the meager wages. But the stories grow more insistent, more detailed, more unbelievable. Pamphlets arrive, filled with romanticized images of vast fertile prairies, endless skies, and bountiful harvests. Letters from those who went before speak of new opportunities, of owning land, of being your own master. The American dream of land ownership and self-reliance, once a distant fantasy, now seems within reach. The psychological appeal is immense, almost irresistible. It taps into the deepest human desires for security, for status, for a chance to rewrite one's destiny, to escape the grinding poverty or the rigid class structures that defined so many lives. It promises a clean slate, a new beginning, a chance to become someone entirely new, untethered from the past. Imagine the decision. You have a family, responsibilities, a life that, while perhaps not prosperous, is at least stable. You have a wife, children, a small plot of land, or a modest trade. But the thought of gold, of unimaginable wealth, begins to gnaw at you. It's a constant, burning sensation, a fever that consumes your thoughts, your dreams, your very being, eclipsing all other considerations. You see your neighbors, your friends packing up, selling everything they own, heading west with a wild look in their eyes. The fear of being left behind, of missing out on the greatest opportunity in human history, of watching others succeed while you remain stagnant, becomes a powerful motivator, a social contagion. The societal pressure is immense, a collective madness taking hold as entire towns empty out. Old men, young boys barely out of childhood, seasoned farmers, respectable lawyers, dedicated doctors, even preachers, all succumb to the lure, abandoning everything for the promise of California, driven by a shared delusion. The journey itself is a testament to this desperation, a grim filter for the truly committed. For those on the East Coast, it means a perilous sea voyage around Cape Horn, the notoriously stormy southern tip of South America. Imagine months of relentless storms, mountainous waves that threaten to swallow your ship whole, and the constant fear of capsizing in the frigid, unforgiving waters. Or a shorter but equally perilous journey to the Isthmus of Panama, followed by a dangerous, fever-ridden overland trek through malaria-infested jungles, and then another sea voyage up the Pacific coast, battling disease and uncertainty. Disease, starvation, and cramped, unsanitary conditions were constant companions. Many died before even reaching California, their dreams drowned in the vast ocean or buried in the mosquito-infested swamps of the isthmus, their bodies never to be found. But for the majority, the journey meant the brutal overland trek across the vast, unforgiving American continent. You joined a wagon train, a desperate horde of thousands, all driven by the singular, overwhelming desire for gold. This was the California Trail, a branch of the more famous Oregon Trail, stretching over 2,000 miles of desolate plains, towering mountains, and scorching deserts. You sell your farm, mortgage your future, leave your family with a desperate promise to return rich, a promise that was often unfulfilled. This is not a casual trip. It is an act of profound desperation and immense hope, a gamble with your very life, your entire future, and the well-being of those you leave behind. The psychological impact of this decision is immediate and profound. You are severing ties, leaving behind everything familiar, the comfort of routine, the security of community, the predictability of your old life, all vanish, replaced by uncertainty, fear, and a gnawing anxiety about the unknown. Yet the dream of independence, the intoxicating vision of a life transformed, pushes you forward, overriding all doubts. You are driven by a singular, overwhelming desire, a fever that consumes your thoughts, your dreams, your very being, eclipsing all other considerations. The promise of the empty land has become a roar, and you are caught in its irresistible current, heading towards a place that offers ultimate freedom, but will demand far more than you can imagine. Your world, once familiar and comforting, is slowly, inexorably transforming into a nightmare, and you are trapped within its chilling embrace, watching the very source of life wither before your eyes, and feeling your own life ebb away mile by mile into the vast, silent unknown.
You've succumbed to the lure of the empty land, abandoning your old life for the promise of the American frontier. You've endured the arduous journey, the physical torment, and the psychological scars of the trail. Now, you've arrived. You stand on your 160 acres, a vast, empty expanse under an even vaster sky. This is it. This is your dream realized. But forget the romanticized image of a cozy cabin nestled among waving wheat fields. This is the horizon's deception, where the promise of boundless space quickly transforms into the chilling reality of utter solitude, and the work of establishing a homestead becomes a grim, soul-crushing battle against the land itself. The first challenge hits you immediately: building a home. For many, especially on the treeless plains, this meant a sod house. Imagine building a shelter not from wood or stone, but from dense prairie turf, cut into heavy blocks and stacked like bricks. The work is backbreaking, your hands raw, your muscles screaming. A sod house, or a soddy, is dark, damp, and often leaks when it rains, turning the interior into a muddy mess. It harbors insects and snakes, which find refuge in its earthen walls. The smell is a pervasive mix of damp earth, decaying sod, and the ever-present aroma of unwashed bodies. This is your new home, a crude earthen coffin, constantly crumbling without meticulous maintenance, a grim reflection of your precarious existence. The sensory details of this new environment are overwhelming and often unsettling. The vast, empty expanse of the prairie stretches in all directions, an unbroken horizon that, while beautiful, can induce profound feelings of insignificance and loneliness. The sky above is immense, a boundless dome that can feel both inspiring and terrifyingly indifferent. The wind, a constant, unseen presence, whispers through the tall prairie grass, a monotonous, haunting sound that never truly ceases. There are no familiar sounds of distant neighbors, no church bells, no market chatter, only the whisper of the wind, the cry of a lone coyote, and the relentless hum of insects. This profound auditory monotony can amplify your own thoughts, making the silence scream. The initial shock of utter solitude quickly gives way to a gnawing realization: you are truly alone. Miles, sometimes dozens of miles, separate you from your nearest neighbor. There are no friendly faces to greet you in the morning, no casual conversations over a fence, no impromptu gatherings. Your only companions are your immediate family, if you have brought them, and the vast, indifferent landscape. This extreme geographical isolation is a physical reality that quickly becomes a psychological burden, a constant, subtle pressure on your mind. The psychological impact of the solitude is immense. You yearn for human connection, for a familiar voice, for a simple shared moment. but there is nothing. The silence, initially perhaps a welcome change from the noisy world you left behind, soon becomes oppressive, amplifying your own internal anxieties and fears. You might find yourself talking to your animals, or even to inanimate objects, desperate for a response. The lines between solitude and isolation begin to blur, and the mind, left to its own devices in this vast emptiness, can begin to play tricks. This is the horizon's deception, a land that promised boundless freedom, but delivered an equally boundless solitude, a chilling prelude to the unseen depths of frontier loneliness.
You've arrived at your homestead, built your soddy, and are confronting the overwhelming visual vastness of the frontier. But now, let's talk about a more insidious torment, one that assaulted the very fabric of your mind, the profound auditory isolation. Forget the constant hum of traffic, the distant rumble of trains, the chatter of voices that define modern life. In the pre-industrial world, especially on the vast, empty American frontier, the silence was often deafening. And that silence, initially perhaps a welcome respite, could quickly begin to scream. Before the cacophony of industrialization and the ubiquitous noise pollution of the modern age, the world was for the most part profoundly quiet. The sounds were natural. The rustle of leaves, the chirping of birds, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of the wind. On the frontier, this natural quiet was amplified to an extreme degree. Miles, sometimes dozens of miles, separated you from the nearest human settlement. There were no church bells, no factory whistles, no street vendors hawking their wares. Only the vast, empty sound of silence broken by nature's rhythm. The absence of human voices, of laughter, of conversation was a constant gnawing void. For individuals used to the communal sounds of a village or a bustling city, this silence was deeply unsettling. It created a psychological vacuum, an echo chamber where your own thoughts, your own fears, your own anxieties were amplified to an unbearable degree. You might find yourself craving the simplest human sound, even a distant shout, just to confirm the existence of another living soul. Initially, the sounds of nature might have seemed peaceful, the gentle sigh of the wind through the tall prairie grass, the melodious chirping of crickets at dusk, the mournful howl of a distant coyote. But over time, this constant, repetitive natural symphony could become oppressive, monotonous, even terrifying. The relentless whisper of the wind could transform into a maddening drone, the chirping insects into a relentless assault on your nerves. Every rustle in the grass, every snap of a twig could be a wild animal, or worse, an unseen threat, turning the natural world into a source of paranoia. In conditions of extreme isolation and psychological stress, the mind, desperate for input, can begin to create its own. Prolonged auditory monotony or deprivation could lead to vivid auditory hallucinations. You might hear phantom voices, distant conversations, the familiar sounds of your old home, or even the screams of unseen tormentors. These hallucinations, vivid and compelling, could blur the lines between reality and delusion, consuming your thoughts. The external silence amplified the internal turmoil. Unprocessed grief for loved ones left behind or lost on the trail, unspoken fears of crop failure or Native American attack, the gnawing anxiety of isolation. These internal screams were no longer muffled by the sounds of daily life. They echoed in the vast emptiness, becoming louder, more insistent, consuming your thoughts. The profound loneliness found its voice in this silence, a constant, tormenting presence. Humans rely on a rich tapestry of sensory input to orient themselves and feel grounded in reality. The absence of familiar human sounds, of predictable auditory cues, could be deeply disorienting. It created a sense of unreality, a feeling of being adrift in a void, disconnected from the very fabric of existence. This loss of sensory reference points contributed to a pervasive sense of unease and detachment. Men and women on the frontier often sought to cope with this profound auditory isolation through desperate means. Alcoholism provided a temporary, albeit destructive, escape, dulling the senses and offering a hazy oblivion. Singing, talking to oneself, or even talking to animals became common, desperate attempts to fill the void with human sound. The psychological need for this auditory input was so strong that even a one-sided conversation was better than nothing. The silence that screamed was a cruel torment in the American frontier, transforming the promise of boundless freedom into a psychological prison of profound auditory isolation. It revealed that human beings are fundamentally social creatures, and that the absence of genuine human sound can be as devastating as any physical hardship, amplifying the screams of the soul in the vast, unforgiving wilderness.
You've established your homestead, built your sati, and are grappling with the oppressive silence that amplifies your every thought and fear. But the auditory isolation is merely one facet of a deeper, more insidious torment, the profound social deprivation. Forget the comfort of casual interactions, the warmth of shared laughter, the solace of a neighbor's visit. On the frontier, days could stretch into weeks, sometimes months, without seeing a single human face beyond your immediate family. This was a life of forced solitude, a psychological crucible that tested the very limits of human connection and often left indelible scars. The reality of frontier settlement meant that neighbors were not just a few houses away, they could be miles, sometimes dozens of miles distant. These were not distances easily traversed by horse or foot, especially with bad roads, unpredictable weather, or the demands of daily labor. The sheer vastness of the American West, the immense distances between homesteads, meant that social contact was a rare, precious luxury, not a given. The only visitors might be a passing Native American, a lone trapper, or a desperate traveler, interactions that were often fraught with suspicion rather than comfort. The comforting rhythm of casual social interaction, a chat over the fence, a quick stop at the local market, a spontaneous visit to a friend, simply didn't exist. There were no impromptu gatherings, no shared gossip, no passing pleasantries. Every interaction had to be planned, often requiring a half-day's journey or more, a significant undertaking for busy homesteaders. This absence of spontaneous human contact created a pervasive sense of emptiness, a constant craving for connection that went unfulfilled. The impact on women in particular was devastating. Women, often left alone on the homestead for days or weeks while husbands traveled for supplies or work, suffered disproportionately from this social isolation. They were cut off from the female companionship they had known back east. Mothers, sisters, friends, neighbors, who provided emotional support, shared burdens, and offered a sense of belonging. Their diaries frequently mentioned crippling loneliness, despair, and the psychological strain of having no adult conversation for extended periods beyond their immediate family. This emotional deprivation was a silent, insidious torment, leading some to what was grimly called prairie madness. The lack of shared experiences with other women, of commiseration over the hardships of frontier life, amplified their suffering. While families were together, the constant, unchanging presence of only a few familiar faces could also become a source of strain. Without external input, without new perspectives or social dynamics, relationships could become strained, resentments could fester, and the monotony could become oppressive. The lack of fresh social interaction meant the emotional landscape remained static, amplifying any existing tensions and making conflicts feel inescapable. The family unit, while a source of strength, could also become a pressure cooker. In a settled community, individuals have multiple social roles: neighbor, friend, church member, guildsman, participant in local politics. On the frontier, these roles vanished. Your identity was reduced to your immediate family unit and your struggle for survival. This loss of broader social identity, of being part of a larger community, could be deeply disorienting and psychologically unsettling, contributing to a sense of rootlessness and despair. It was a profound narrowing of one's world. Prolonged social deprivation could lead to an erosion of social skills. Individuals, unaccustomed to conversation, might become withdrawn, awkward, or even irritable when rare opportunities for social contact arose. Children, growing up in such isolated environments, might struggle with social development, making it difficult for them to adapt to more populated areas later in life. The very act of speaking to a stranger could become a source of anxiety. The profound loneliness and social deprivation could lead to a range of psychological manifestations. Beyond general depression and anxiety, some pioneers reported experiencing what was called prairie madness, a frontier-specific term for severe mental distress, occasionally including psychosis, irrational fears, or extreme withdrawal.
While the term itself is informal, it reflects the very real psychological breakdowns induced by the extreme conditions. The mind, starved of human connection, could unravel in the vast emptiness, succumbing to its own internal demons. The invisible chains of social deprivation were a cruel torment on the American frontier, binding settlers to a psychological prison even as they sought ultimate freedom. They revealed that human beings, despite their rugged individualism, are fundamentally social creatures, and that the absence of genuine connection can be as devastating as any physical hardship, amplifying the screams of the soul in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. The frontier, promising boundless liberty, often delivered an equally boundless loneliness, a haunting echo in the quiet vastness.
You've witnessed the brutal demands of homesteading, the oppressive silence, and the profound psychological impact of isolation. But in this vast, empty landscape where human contact was scarce, the mind, ever resilient, found ways to cope. Forget the chatter of crowded towns. On the frontier, the primary conversation was often internal, a constant dialogue within one's own mind, shaping unique internal worlds born of radical self-reliance and enforced solitude. The necessity of self-reliance on the frontier was absolute. You were your own doctor, builder, farmer, hunter, and problem solver. Every decision, every task rested solely on your shoulders. This fostered an incredible spirit of independence and ingenuity, a fierce pride in one's own capabilities. But it also meant a profound lack of external input, of differing opinions, of shared burdens, of anyone to truly lean on. The mind, without constant external stimulus or social interaction, turned inward, becoming both a refuge and, at times, a tormentor, a vast landscape of thought. Without the constant distractions of modern life or the simple presence of others, your internal monologue, the voice of your own thoughts, became incredibly amplified. It was your primary companion, filling the silence. This could be a source of strength, allowing for deep introspection, problem-solving, and creative thinking, as the mind had ample space to wander, but it could also become a relentless echo chamber for anxieties, fears, and regrets, with no external perspective to offer balance or distraction. No one to tell you that your fears were irrational. The silence made every worry louder. Driven by the desperate need for interaction, pioneers often found themselves talking to their animals, horses, cattle, even chickens, treating them as confidants, pouring out their fears and hopes. Some even conversed with inanimate objects, their tools, the very landscape around them, or the stars above. This was not a sign of madness, but a poignant human attempt to fill the void of social isolation, to hear a voice, any voice, breaking the oppressive silence. It was a coping mechanism, however desperate, a way to externalize their internal world. The necessity of performing every task oneself, of solving every problem without outside help, bred an intense sense of self-reliance. This was a valuable survival skill, fostering ingenuity and resilience, but it also had a psychological cost. It could lead to an inability to ask for help, a deep distrust of others, and a profound sense of isolation even when in a group, as the habit of relying only on oneself became deeply ingrained. The very idea of dependence became an anathema. Without external perspectives or new information, the mind could easily become trapped in cycles of obsessive thinking. Fears about crop failure, Native American attack, or illness could be replayed endlessly, without external validation or rational challenge. The limited social input could lead to narrowed perspectives, making it difficult to adapt to new ideas or to understand those from different backgrounds, fostering prejudice. The mind had few new inputs, so it replayed the old ones. For those who persevered, living in radical solitude required immense psychological discipline. It meant actively finding internal resources to combat loneliness, to maintain a sense of purpose, and to avoid succumbing to despair. This might involve strict adherence to routines, religious devotion, reading, if books were available, or focusing intensely on the physical demands of homesteading,
allowing labor to fill the mental void and provide a sense of accomplishment. It was a constant battle against the self. The mind's internal world became both a refuge and a prison. It offered a space for reflection, for dreams, for connection to loved ones far away, for building castles in the air. But it could also become a terrifying place filled with anxieties, unresolved conflicts, and the echoes of loneliness with no escape. The internal landscape became more vivid, more real than the vast, empty external one, sometimes to a dangerous degree. The mind's conversations in the American frontier were a chilling testament to human adaptability and the profound psychological impact of extreme isolation. They revealed that human beings, despite their rugged individualism, are fundamentally social creatures, and that the absence of genuine connection can be as devastating as any physical hardship, amplifying the screams of the soul in the vast, unforgiving wilderness.
You've grappled with the physical hardships, the psychological toll of isolation, and the terrifying reality of sickness in solitude. But on the American frontier, another, more insidious threat loomed constantly. Illness or injury, striking miles from any help. Forget the comfort of a doctor's visit, a hospital, or even a sympathetic neighbor. On the frontier, sickness and solitude was a death sentence whispered by the wind, a test of endurance where hope often withered and despair deepened. The reality was simple. If you or a loved one fell ill or suffered a serious injury, you were, for all intents and purposes, entirely on your own. The nearest settlement might be days or weeks away, an impossible journey for a sick or injured body. There were no telephones, no ambulances, no quick paths to medical aid. Your fate rested entirely on the limited medical knowledge you possessed, the crude remedies you could concoct, and perhaps on sheer desperate luck. The silence of the homestead would be broken only by the groans of the sick or the quiet desperation of the caregiver. Medical care was rudimentary at best. Most pioneers had no formal medical training, relying on folk remedies passed down through generations, often a mix of herbal concoctions, poultices, and superstitious practices. For a fever, you might try a strong herbal tea. For a broken bone, crude splints fashioned from wood and rags. For a deep cut, cauterization with a hot iron might be attempted, a searing pain to prevent bleeding or infection. These desperate measures were often ineffective, or worse, actively harmful, introducing further infection or poisoning. The desperate hope invested in these crude remedies was a psychological balm, however, fleeting. Diseases like typhoid, dysentery, cholera, smallpox, and pneumonia were rampant, particularly among children, and terrifying because their causes are unknown. A simple cough could escalate into a fatal lung infection. A sudden fever could mean weeks of delirium and agonizing death. The psychological torment of battling an invisible enemy without understanding its nature or having any effective tools was immense. You watched helplessly as loved ones wasted away, their suffering prolonged by ignorance, their bodies slowly consumed by unseen forces. The fear of contagion, even when its mechanism was unknown, was ever present. If a family member fell ill, the burden on the healthy caregiver was immense. They faced impossible choices. Leave the sick to find help, a potentially fatal journey through the wilderness, or stay and watch them suffer, powerless to truly intervene. The caregiver would be exhausted, terrified, and utterly alone, their own health at risk from contagion. The psychological toll of witnessing such prolonged suffering, of trying to nurse someone back to health with no real knowledge, was profound, leading to severe emotional and physical burnout. The constant fear of losing a child or a spouse, miles from any support, was a gnawing dread that never truly left them. For the afflicted, the terror of dying alone, far from the comforting presence of a priest or a community, was immense. The thought of being buried in an unmarked grave, forgotten by the world, added another layer of despair. The physical pain was compounded by this profound existential loneliness, a silent scream in the wilderness, unheard by any. Even if one survived, the consequences of illness or injury could be lifelong. A broken bone might never heal properly, leaving a permanent limp or disability. An illness might leave behind chronic pain, weakness, or organ damage. These scars were constant reminders of the frontier's brutality, limiting one's ability to work and thrive, creating a continuous cycle of hardship and dependence. The body, once a tool for survival, became a source of constant suffering. The repeated experience of helplessness in the face of illness or injury, the inability to save oneself or one's loved ones, fostered a deep sense of powerlessness and fatalism. This eroded optimism and replaced it with a grim resignation, a belief that one's fate was entirely out of one's hands, dictated by an indifferent nature. The shadow of illness was a constant, terrifying companion on the American frontier, transforming the dream of independence into a harsh reality of profound vulnerability and agonizing solitude. It revealed that human resilience, however mighty, had its limits, and that even the strongest spirits could be broken by the relentless onslaught of sickness in a world devoid of comfort or care.
You've grappled with the physical hardships, the psychological toll of isolation, and the terrifying reality of sickness in solitude. But on the American frontier, another, more insidious threat loomed constantly: the complex, often misunderstood, and frequently terrifying reality of Native American relations. Forget the simplistic cowboys versus Indians narratives of later fiction, where conflict was clear-cut and morality easily defined. This was the landscape of profound cultural collision, where fear, misunderstanding, and the constant threat of violence, both real and imagined, bred a deep-seated paranoia that permeated every aspect of pioneer life. The vast lands of the American West were not empty. They were the ancestral homes of hundreds of distinct Native American tribes and nations, with diverse languages, cultures, and sophisticated ways of life, some dating back thousands of years. They lived in harmony with the land, their societies intricately woven into its ecosystems, managing resources sustainably. The sudden, overwhelming influx of white settlers, driven by the promise of free land, represented an existential threat to these indigenous peoples, leading to inevitable conflict, a clash of worlds. For many pioneers, Native Americans were an unknown, terrifying other. Stereotypes, fueled by sensationalized stories from back east and racial prejudice, painted them as savages or hostiles, inherently violent and unpredictable. This fear, often irrational and based on ignorance, led to a constant state of hypervigilance. Every rustle in the tall grass, every distant dust cloud, every unfamiliar sound could be interpreted as a sign of an impending attack, turning the natural world into a source of terror. This pervasive paranoia was a constant psychological torment, denying settlers any true peace of mind, making them perpetually on edge. While popular culture often exaggerated Native American aggression, real threats did exist. As settlers encroached on tribal lands, violated treaties, destroyed traditional food sources, like the buffalo, a deliberate act of warfare, and polluted waterways with mining operations, Native Americans often retaliated to protect their way of life, their families, and their ancestral lands. Raids for horses or supplies and violent clashes over territory were a grim reality, a desperate fight for survival. The psychological impact of living under the constant threat of such attacks, of knowing that your family could be targeted at any moment, was immense, leading to a profound sense of vulnerability. For some pioneers, particularly those with a conscience or a religious background that emphasized justice, the systematic displacement and violence against Native Americans might have led to a subtle, unacknowledged psychological burden of guilt. While often justified by the prevailing ideology of manifest destiny, the reality of taking land and witnessing atrocities could create internal conflict, contributing to a pervasive unease and a sense of moral compromise. This internal conflict, unaddressed, could fester. The profound isolation of frontier homesteads
amplified the fear of Native Americans. Without the protection of military garrisons or nearby communities, families felt utterly vulnerable. A single isolated cabin was an easy target, and help was often days away if it came at all. This extreme vulnerability fueled the paranoia, turning every shadow into a potential threat, every distant sound into a harbinger of doom. The vastness of the land, once a symbol of freedom, became a symbol of extreme danger. Language barriers and profound cultural differences led to constant misunderstandings. Native concepts of land ownership, community, and justice clashed fundamentally with European American views, leading to irreconcilable differences. Treaties were frequently broken by the U.S. government, leading to further distrust and resentment. The inability to truly understand the other's perspective contributed to a cycle of fear and violence, where both sides often acted out of perceived necessity rather than malice. Pioneers lived in a constant state of vigilance. Firearms were kept close at hand, homes were fortified with loopholes for shooting, children were taught to fear strangers and to be constantly alert. This constant state of alert, this perpetual readiness for conflict, was utterly exhausting, eroding mental and physical well-being. Sleep was fitful, punctuated by nightmares of attack, a constant battle against internal and external threats. The unseen threat of Native American relations was a cruel torment on the American frontier, transforming the dream of independence into a harsh reality of profound vulnerability and constant fear. It revealed that human beings, when confronted with the other in a lawless environment, can succumb to deep-seated prejudices and paranoia, leading to a cycle of violence and suffering that left indelible scars on both the conquerors and the conquered, a haunting legacy of conflict and misunderstanding.
You've grappled with the physical hardships, the psychological toll of isolation, and the pervasive fear of unseen threats. But on the American frontier, another more fundamental adversary loomed constantly: the harsh hand of nature, the weather's cruel and unpredictable caprice. Forget the gentle seasons of settled lands, the predictable patterns of rain and sun. The frontier elements were not just uncomfortable, they were deadly, capable of wiping out years of labor and entire families in a single terrifying display of raw power. The vast, untamed wilderness of the American West was breathtakingly beautiful, yes, but it was also utterly unforgiving. Without modern forecasting, without reliable communication, storms arrived with little warning, turning a clear sky into a harbinger of death in minutes. The psychological impact of living under such unpredictable, overwhelming natural forces was immense, fostering a deep sense of powerlessness and fatalism, a constant awareness of human insignificance. Winter blizzards on the plains and in the mountains were notorious killers. They could descend suddenly, trapping travelers and homesteaders, burying homes under feet of snow, and bringing temperatures far below freezing. Without adequate fuel or shelter, death from exposure was common. Livestock froze in their pastures, their bodies becoming grim markers. The psychological torment of being trapped, isolated, and slowly freezing, listening to the relentless howl of the wind, was immense. The fear of being snowed in, cut off from all help, was a constant winter dread, a terrifying form of confinement. Conversely, prolonged droughts could be equally devastating, a slow, agonizing form of death. Weeks, months, even years without adequate rain would wither crops, turn once fertile fields into dusty, barren wastes, and dry up crucial water sources. Animals would starve, and families would face agonizing hunger and thirst. The psychological impact of watching your livelihood slowly die, of seeing your children suffer from thirst, of knowing your efforts were futile against an indifferent sky, was a slow strangulation of hope. The endless clear skies, once a blessing, became a cruel mockery, a symbol of their impending doom. On the plains, tornadoes were a terrifying reality, a sudden violent manifestation of the sky's fury. These destructive whirlwinds could appear with little warning, tearing through homesteads, flattening sod houses, and scattering possessions for miles. There were no storm shelters, no emergency services, no warning sirens.
The sheer, overwhelming power of a tornado, the deafening roar, the terrifying speed of its approach left survivors with profound psychological trauma, a constant fear of the sky's unpredictable fury, a reminder of their utter vulnerability. In arid regions, sudden torrential rains could turn dry creek beds into raging, deadly rivers in minutes, causing flash floods that swept away wagons, livestock, and even entire families. The unexpectedness and sheer force of these floods left little time to escape, instilling a fear of seemingly innocent waterways, turning them into death traps. The dry prairie grasses and dense forests were prone to massive wildfires, often sparked by lightning or human carelessness. These infernos could spread with terrifying speed, consuming everything in their path: homes, crops, livestock, and lives. The sight of a towering wall of flame approaching, the suffocating smoke, and the desperate flight for survival left indelible psychological scars, a haunting memory of the consuming inferno. Beyond specific events, the sheer extremes of frontier temperatures were a constant physical and psychological burden. Scorching summer heat could lead to heat stroke and delirium, while bitter winter cold caused frostbite, hypothermia, and a constant bone-deep chill. The body was perpetually fighting the elements, draining energy and resilience, a relentless battle against nature's indifference. The harsh hand of nature was a constant, terrifying companion on the American frontier, transforming the dream of independence into a brutal reality of profound vulnerability and constant fear. It revealed that human beings, however mighty, were ultimately at the mercy of forces far greater than themselves, and that the elements, in their cruel caprice, could break the strongest spirits and shatter the most enduring hopes.
You've grappled with the physical hardships, the psychological toll of isolation, and the terrifying realities of nature's caprice. But perhaps the most pervasive, soul-crushing aspect of frontier life was the sheer, relentless, backbreaking labor. Forget the romantic images of rugged individualists enjoying the fruits of their toil, building their dreams with ease. This was a daily grind that pushed the human body and spirit to its absolute breaking point, often leading to chronic pain, early death, and a profound sense of exhaustion that no amount of sleep could truly alleviate. Life on the frontier was defined by constant physical exertion, from dawn until dusk, often 10-12 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week. There were no weekends off, no vacations, and certainly no ergonomic considerations or safety regulations. Your body was your primary tool, used until it broke down, a disposable commodity in the relentless pursuit of survival and improvement of the land. For farmers, the first monumental task was breaking the land. Prairie sod, held together by dense grass roots that had developed over centuries, was extraordinarily difficult to plow with the crude equipment available to most settlers. It could take a year or more just to prepare a few acres for planting, a monumental effort that left men and animals exhausted. Once crops were planted, the work was relentless, weeding by hand under a scorching sun, battling pests, and harvesting under immense pressure. Every structure had to be built by hand: sod houses, log cabins, barns, fences. This involved felling trees, hauling heavy timber, digging foundations, and constructing walls, often with minimal tools and no outside help. Homes were constantly in need of repair, leaking roofs, crumbling walls, requiring endless maintenance, a never-ending cycle of physical exertion. Access to basic necessities was a daily struggle. Water had to be hauled from distant wells or streams, often hundreds of pounds per day for drinking, cooking, and washing. Fuel for heating and cooking, wood, buffalo chips, dried manure, or twisted grass had to be gathered, often for hours each day, a constant laborious chore that consumed precious time and energy. For those raising animals, livestock care was a constant, demanding task. Herding, feeding, milking, mucking out stalls, and protecting animals from predators involved heavy physical labor, often in harsh weather conditions. Injuries from unpredictable animals are common, adding to the daily risks. Beyond the physical pain, the relentless, monotonous nature of frontier labor took a severe psychological toll. Day after day, week after week, the same back-breaking tasks with little variation or intellectual stimulation. This monotony could lead to profound boredom, apathy, and a sense of being trapped in an endless cycle of toil. The mind, starved of novelty, could become dulled, its spirit slowly eroded. This constant physical strain led to chronic pain, permanent injuries, hernias, ruptured discs, and severe arthritis. Men and women in their 30s looked 50 or 60, their bodies permanently hunched, arthritic, and ravaged by toil, their youth stolen by the demands of the frontier. The body was a tool, used until it broke. The daily grind of frontier life was a relentless assault on the human body and spirit, transforming the dream of independence into a harsh reality of profound physical suffering and endless toil. It revealed that human endurance, however mighty, had its limits, and that even the strongest spirits could be broken by the relentless demands of a world where every necessity had to be earned through agonizing labor. The quiet hum of progress was often the silent scream of a body pushed beyond its limits.
You've endured the brutal demands of labor, the psychological toll of isolation, and the relentless caprice of nature. But on the American frontier, another, more insidious adversary was always present: disease. Forget the simple notion of a clean, healthy life in the fresh air. The frontier was a breeding ground for unseen killers, and disease, often allied with malnutrition and poor sanitation, was the Grim Reaper's most effective tool, claiming more lives than any Native American attack or outlaw's bullet. The mining camps, burgeoning towns, and isolated homesteads were hotbeds of illness, far deadlier than any visible threat. Without proper sewage systems, access to clean water sources, or any understanding of germ theory, illnesses spread rapidly through the crowded communities and isolated families. Waterborne diseases like cholera and dysentery were rampant, caused by contaminated water sources, often rivers used for both mining and waste disposal, and poor sanitation. Cholera, in particular, was terrifyingly swift, causing severe diarrhea, vomiting, rapid dehydration, and death within hours. Dysentery led to prolonged suffering, weakening victims until they succumbed. Despite being on land, scurvy was common due to a monotonous diet lacking fresh fruits and vegetables, especially during long winters. Bleeding gums, loose teeth, extreme fatigue, and open sores were common, slowly debilitating pioneers. Other deficiency diseases affected growth in children and caused various chronic health problems in adults. Highly contagious diseases like typhoid, smallpox, measles, diphtheria, and whooping cough swept through camps and settlements, decimating populations, particularly children who had little immunity. A simple cough could escalate into a fatal lung infection. A sudden fever could mean weeks of delirium and agonizing death. These epidemics often wiped out entire families or communities, leaving behind a trail of death and disfigurement. For those in the goldfields, specific occupational hazards added to the grim tally. Miners constantly inhaled fine rock dust, leading to silicosis, a painful lung disease that slowly suffocated its victims. Mercury, used extensively in gold processing, caused neurological damage, tremors, and mental deterioration, leading to madness. Medical care was rudimentary at best. Most doctors had little or no formal training, often charlatans or former barbers. Surgical procedures were performed without anesthesia, beyond whiskey or morphine, and sterilization was virtually unknown, leading to rampant post-surgical infections. Something as simple as an infected cut could quickly lead to amputation or death. Common treatments included bloodletting, mercury compounds, and arsenic, which often did more harm than good, accelerating the decline. If you were injured or fell ill on the frontier, your survival often depended more on luck than medical intervention. The combined impact of these factors meant devastatingly high mortality rates. Life expectancy at birth was often under 40 years old. Child mortality remained tragically high, with approximately 1 in 4 children dying before reaching adulthood.
The psychological toll of witnessing such widespread death, the rapid decay of bodies, and the sheer helplessness in the face of invisible killers was immense. It left an indelible mark on their minds, a haunting legacy of terror and loss, a chilling reminder that the frontier's beauty masked a brutal reality of constant suffering and death's triumph.
You've journeyed through the full, horrifying cycle of frontier life. The lure of the empty land, the perilous journey, the lawless chaos, the body's breaking point, the madness of luck, the invisible chains of isolation, the devastating toll of disease, and the enduring scars of trauma. You've seen how the frontier twisted bodies and minds and shattered hopes. But even when the immediate danger subsided, when the homestead was established or the goldfields dwindled, the horror did not simply vanish. It left behind a profound and enduring legacy of trauma, invisible scars etched upon the minds and souls of the survivors, shaping generations to come, a haunting echo of the past that refused to be silenced. Forget the notion of a quick recovery, of simply returning to normalcy as if nothing had happened. The psychological impact of prolonged hardship, constant danger, and profound loss is immense, manifesting in myriad ways long after the immediate threat has passed, a complex tapestry of lingering pain. The human mind, pushed to its absolute limits, does not simply reset. Chronic anxiety and hypervigilance were common among survivors of the frontier. A pervasive sense of unease never truly dissipated. The constant threat of violence, from humans or nature, the fear of economic ruin, and the memory of pervasive disease left them perpetually on edge, their nervous systems permanently rewired for danger. They might remain hypervigilant, constantly scanning their environment for signs of threat, unable to fully relax, even in safe surroundings. Every sudden noise, every unexpected shadow could trigger a cascade of terrifying memories, turning mundane moments into relived horrors. This constant state of alert was utterly exhausting, eroding their physical and mental well-being. Trust issues and social breakdown were also a harsh reality. The breakdown of trust in the lawless frontier left deep, festering wounds that rarely healed. Survivors might struggle to trust others, even family members, remembering the desperate acts and betrayals they witnessed or committed. This could lead to profound social isolation, difficulty forming genuine bonds, and a pervasive cynicism about human nature, a belief that everyone was ultimately out for themselves. The experience of extreme individualism and ruthless competition often eroded their capacity for true community, leaving them feeling alone even in a crowd. Relationships became transactional, built on suspicion rather than genuine affection. Guilt and moral injury were heavy burdens. For those who made desperate choices to survive, stealing, abandoning loved ones, engaging in violence, or witnessing unspeakable acts, the psychological burden of guilt and moral injury could be immense. They might be haunted by their actions, tormented by vivid nightmares, and struggle with profound self-condemnation, a constant internal battle against their past. This could lead to severe depression, self-loathing, and a perpetual sense of unworthiness, a feeling of being forever tainted by the horrors they endured or inflicted. Emotional numbness and apathy often persisted. For some, the emotional numbness and apathy that developed during their ordeal might continue, a chilling form of psychological self-preservation. They might become emotionally flat, detached from their own feelings and the feelings of others, unable to experience joy, sorrow, or empathy fully. This emotional blunting, while a coping mechanism to survive the overwhelming trauma, ultimately robbed them of their full humanity, leaving them hollow, a mere shadow of their former selves. The vibrant colors of life would fade, replaced by a dull, gray existence. Substance abuse and mental illness were common consequences. The coping mechanisms developed on the frontier, particularly alcoholism, opium use, and other forms of substance abuse, often persisted long after. Many returned with entrenched addictions, using substances to numb their pain and escape their memories.
The psychological stresses also contributed to higher rates of severe depression, chronic anxiety disorders, and other forms of mental illness, often unrecognized and untreated in an era with little understanding of mental health, leading to further suffering and societal marginalization. Perhaps most chillingly, the trauma of the frontier could be passed down through generations. This was an intergenerational trauma, a haunting legacy that transcended individual experience. Children of survivors might exhibit heightened anxiety around financial insecurity, a distrust of authority, or a pervasive sense of insecurity even if they never experienced the frontier themselves. The stories, the fears, the coping mechanisms of their parents became deeply ingrained, shaping their own psychological landscape. This created a haunting legacy, where the echoes of desperation persisted long after the dust settled, manifesting as unexplained anxieties, fears, or behaviors in subsequent generations, a silent burden carried through time. The enduring scars of the American frontier were often invisible, hidden beneath a veneer of normalcy, but they were profound and lasting. They shaped individuals, families, and entire societies, leaving a legacy of chronic anxiety, broken trust, and psychological wounds that could take centuries to heal. The silent screams of those who endured the frontier may have faded from the immediate landscape, but their echoes continue to haunt the minds of survivors and their descendants, a chilling testament to the frontier's ultimate power to break humanity, leaving an indelible mark on the soul of a nation.
You've journeyed through the full, horrifying cycle of frontier life. The lure of the empty land, the perilous journey, the lawless chaos, the body's breaking point, the madness of luck, the invisible chains of isolation, the devastating toll of disease, and the enduring scars of trauma. You've seen how the frontier twisted bodies and minds and shattered hopes. Now, let's conclude by confronting its ultimate, enduring legacy. The echoes that reverberate through time, shaping generations, influencing American identity, and leaving invisible marks that persist long after the last homestead was settled or the last nugget was found. Forget the simplistic, triumphalist narrative of westward expansion, the sanitized stories of brave pioneers conquering a pristine wilderness. The American frontier, as a historical force, profoundly shaped American society, leaving indelible imprints that continue to influence us in subtle, often unconscious ways, even in modern times. The myth of rugged individualism and self-reliance is its most powerful and enduring legacy. The idea of the rugged individual conquering the wilderness through sheer will and self-reliance became deeply ingrained in the American psyche. This myth, while inspiring ambition and entrepreneurial spirit, also obscured the brutal realities of widespread failure, exploitation, and suffering. It often overlooked the crucial role of community cooperation and government support, like the Homestead Act itself. It continues to influence our attitudes towards wealth, risk, and self-reliance, often leading to unrealistic expectations and a glorification of individual success at any cost, while downplaying the systemic hardships. Environmental transformation and exploitation were rampant. The rapid expansion of agriculture, mining, and logging led to massive deforestation, soil erosion, and the pollution of waterways. The near extinction of the American bison stands as a stark example of unchecked exploitation. This serves as a chilling reminder of the environmental cost of rapid, unregulated expansion and the human impact on fragile ecosystems, a lesson still relevant today as we grapple with climate change and resource depletion. Demographic and cultural diversity, alongside conflict, defined the frontier. It was a true melting pot, drawing people from every corner of the globe. European immigrants, Chinese laborers, African Americans seeking freedom, and dozens of distinct Native American nations.
This created a vibrant, multicultural society, but also fueled intense racial and ethnic discrimination and conflict that shaped the American West for centuries. The legacy of these conflicts, particularly the systematic displacement and violence against Native Americans, continues to resonate in contemporary society. Legal and political development were accelerated by the chaos. Mining laws, water rights, which were crucial in an arid region, and land ownership rules emerged from the disputes of the frontier era, often through brutal trial and error. California's rapid admission to the Union in 1850 was a direct consequence of the population boom. This period laid the foundations for the state's unique legal and political landscape. Intergenerational trauma is a haunting legacy. The trauma of the frontier, the violence, the loss, the failure, the discrimination, was passed down through generations. Descendants of miners, Native Americans, and exploited immigrant groups might exhibit heightened anxiety around financial insecurity, a distrust of authority, or a pervasive sense of insecurity, even if they never experienced the frontier themselves. The stories, the fears, the coping mechanisms of their parents became deeply ingrained, shaping their own psychological landscape. This created a haunting legacy, where the echoes of desperation persisted long after the gold dust settled. Ultimately, the history of the American frontier serves as a chilling, timeless warning. It reveals the seductive power of dreams, the brutal consequences of lawlessness, and the profound human costs of chasing an elusive ideal. In an age of rapid technological change and global economic shifts, understanding the true, multifaceted horror of such a fever, not just its physical toll, but its profound psychological, social, and moral consequences, becomes ever more critical. The silent screams of men consumed by gold fever continue to echo, urging us to remember, to learn, and to act with greater wisdom. The American frontier, in all its terrifying manifestations, is a profound and enduring force in American history. It is a testament to humanity's ultimate vulnerability, but also to its incredible, albeit scarred, resilience. The echoes of the frontier reverberate through time, shaping our economy, our culture, and our psyches, a haunting reminder that some battles, once fought, never truly end, and that the price of a dream can be far higher than any gold. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, perhaps you'll ponder the abundance in your life and the invisible burdens that history's madness has left on the souls of generations, a chilling whisper from the past that reminds us of the true cost of chasing a dream.